All right, everybody, and welcome back to Late Night History with Mr. Michael. No, not really, just kidding. Anyway, so today we talked about the Reformation and how different leaders wanted to reform the church and eventually ended forming what we'll call Protestant faith or protesting faiths. Okay, so I want you to imagine for a second that you're the head of the Catholic Church and you're losing all this power and all these people are leaving your church, and which means you're losing wealth, you're losing influence over people's lives, and so you're starting to get worried. So I want you to think, how would you go about changing and fixing that problem that they were having? Well, so the head of the church at the time, the Pope, was a guy named Paul III. And so what Paul III did was he said, we've got to come up with a solution. And so the solution was he got together the cardinals at a meeting, and they're meeting right here. It's called the Council of Trent. And it's really the Councils of Trent. They met several different times. Okay? And so the Councils of Trent, called by Pope Paul III, what they did was they helped establish the Catholic plan to keep people from leaving the church and to solidify their beliefs and to make sure that they remained powerful and saved people and were faithful to God all at the same time. So he had to come up with a plan. And so his plan had 3 steps. Okay, so I want you to think about any situation where you're losing people, you're a business, who's losing customers, you're a school who's losing students. Then what are you going to do? Okay, what are you going to do to make things better? Well, the Pope, first of all, did a couple of things. So first of all, the Council of Trent first thing it did was they decided to hire help. So step 1 is they decided to hire better help. Remember, one of the main complaints against the church was that their priests were illiterate, uneducated, having babies off on the side, and weren't very faithful to the church doctrine and the church beliefs. And so one of the ways that they did this was the Pope helped to found a new monastic order, or authorized the creation of a new group of monks. And this group of monks was headed by a guy named Ignatius of Loyola, who we'll talk about in a second, who was one of the major reformers of the Catholic Reformation. He was a Catholic guy who really solidified and helped to save the Catholic Church. And he formed what's called the Society of Jesus. It's a group of monks who spread and sought to spread religion throughout the world. And the Jesuits, they're called, the Jesuit priests, are really known for establishing schools for education. They're known for going to Latin America and spreading religion there, spreading Catholicism there, and throughout the world. So hire some better help, better educated, more faithful, more fervent. That means like really awesome, like really not awesome, but really excited about their faith. To hire better help and to solidify their faith there. Step number 2, eliminate the competition. If you've got competition, you're going to try to take that competition out. Now, the competition for the Catholics or the Protestants. So if somebody's going to believe that in something different from the faith, the Catholics just said, fine, let them go do what they're doing. But what they decided to do instead was, we're going to try to keep people who are in the faith, we're going to keep them faithful. And what they did was they issued what's called the Inquisitions. Inquisitions are inquiries or questionings that had been used throughout history in several different times when groups of people felt that they needed to question or go against the church and challenge the church. The Diet of Worms that Martin Luther faced was basically an inquisition. So the Inquisition basically scared people into remaining Catholic and into staying Catholic. The Inquisition was used to persecute witches, was used to persecute all sorts of different things, basically questioning people about their faith. Well, did you do this? No. Well, why? And so they really tried to scare people into staying Catholic. Step number 3 of their plan to reform the Catholic Church was to control the media. We're really going to control what they said. One of the problems was the printing press. Everybody was reading. People were reading all these different books, and so what they came up with was something called the Index of Forbidden Books. It was a group of books that Catholics were not supposed to read because they went against church doctrine. For example, there's a guy named Galileo. Galileo, who we'll look at a little bit later, said that it's not the sun revolving around the earth. Well, he really extends upon this. This is an older theory. But it is the earth revolving around the sun. Well, the church said, no, that's not cool at all. We're not going to go for that. And so they put it on a list of banned books. And if you read that as a Catholic, you were going to hell, basically. There were all sorts of other books on there. Obviously, the 95 Theses. Obviously, Institutes of the Christian Religion were on there because they challenged and went against Catholic belief and Catholic dogma or doctrine, what it meant to be a Catholic. And so those are the three steps they took. One, Pope Paul III called the Council of Trent, and they said, we got to hire more help. So they got better priests with the lead of Loyola. Two, they wanted to eliminate the competition. They issued the Inquisition, questioned people, wanted basically to scare people into remaining faithful Catholics. And three, they tried to control the media with the use of the index and forbidden books. They said, if you read this book, you're not a Catholic because it does not go along and it does not agree with what we say. And if you read this book, we're going to kick you out and excommunicate you, which means you're going to hell and you're ostracized from society. Not a good situation to be in. Well, let's come back and let's talk a little bit about Loyola. So turn back in your notes to the section where we talked about the actions of the reformers and the lives of the reformers. So let's talk about, first of all, who was Loyola? Ignatius of Loyola was a guy who lived from 1491 to 1546. And he was a soldier. And he got hurt fighting a war. And he was laid up in this old castle. And he didn't have anything else to do. And so all he had time for was to read. And so what he did was he read the Bible, and he read some other works and about the lives of saints and all the good things they did. And that made him a more faithful Catholic because of all of that. Well, while he didn't exactly break with the church, he said Catholicism and the idea that you can get to heaven by doing good things is good. The elaborate procedures that are involved in a Catholic church service, they're good. And so he wrote a book called Spiritual Exercises, in which he basically says, no, these things are good things. By living our life in a very, very regular, very ordered fashion, that is a good thing. And he reaffirmed his belief, and his faith was reaffirmed in 1540 when the Pope issued a bull or a statement that created the Society of Jesus. Okay, his Jesuits were a monastic order, a group of monks they're called regular clergy, a group of monks who went around and really tried to spread Catholicism throughout the world. And again, his most significant act and the most important thing he did was to found the Society of Jesus. So what are a couple of his beliefs? Well, being that he was Catholic, he said that it took two things to be saved. One, and go to heaven. One, faith in God, and two, good works. You have to do good things. Who is the authority? Well, Loyola extended a little bit and said the priests were. But in addition to the priests, the Bible was also an authority on religion, and the Bible is also a source of knowledge about the church. He said, and the question was, okay then, who makes up the church? What makes up the church body? And this is where he's really very different from the Protestant reformers. He said that the clergy, priests and monks, and anyone who actually basically working for the church were members of the church. And the lay people, as they're called, the people who aren't in the church, didn't make up the church. The real church were made up of those. And what's the best life in order to best serve God? Was that of being a monk. Regular prayer, working for the church, studying, prayer, basically meditation on God, that's prayer, and doing things for God. The best life was a monastic life, a simple life without having a lot of nice things, and that's one of the things that the Jesuits are known for, is they lived what's known as a very austere lifestyle, very poor, very humble lifestyle, because they felt that they were servants of God and should not be very ostentatious or showy with their wealth. And again, his major thing he wrote was spiritual exercise. So now that we've got the Reformation, let's talk about a few of the major effects of the Reformation on the rest of Europe. Okay, there are three areas that we're going to talk about when we look at the effects of the Reformation. The first area we're going to talk about is Germany. Okay, and when I talk about Germany, I'm basically meaning Central Europe, the area pretty much just straight up north of Italy. So find that on a map, and the area is also known as the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, and it's marked by religious wars. So I want you to write that down in your notes: religious wars. Okay, well, initially after Luther's break, there was a lot of fighting. Well, one of the first things that was signed shortly after Luther's break of the church, relatively shortly, was something called the Peace of Augsburg. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 basically said that every prince in the Holy Roman Empire in Germany can choose what faith his people are. So they can either be Protestants, that means non-Catholic, or Lutherans basically, or they can be Catholic. But your prince chooses. And so that was the compromise. Well, the family that ruled the Holy Roman Empire was a group called the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs were actually Catholics themselves. And so the land that they controlled, they didn't want to be Protestant. And in fact, they were led by a guy named Charles V. And Charles V is a really fascinating guy. He was part of the world called Flanders, which is in the Netherlands. And Charles V at one point actually directly owned and controlled more land in the world than anybody ever has, personally. Okay? And here's why. He not only controlled most of what we'll call today Germany and Netherlands and Switzerland and Austria, but he also controlled Spain, which meant that when Spain expanded into the New World, he controlled those colonies. And so and South America, he controlled all of that. And so he said, no, we're going to take Catholicism and we're going to spread it around and we're going to be Catholics. Well, the rule of the Habsburgs eventually wound its way into what's called the 30 Years' War, which was yet another outbreak of fighting based around religion amongst these two groups against the Protestants and the Catholics. And it turned very violent. Germany was completely destroyed. Any ounce of unification that Germany had, which remember we said that Europe prior to the Renaissance was governed by little small states, not big countries, not big nations. Well, the Holy Roman Empire was just a collection of little countries that sort of got together and say, hey, we'll help each other out. It's basically what it was. Well, that Holy Roman Empire really disintegrated with the 30 Years' War because there was so much infighting. Okay, so the main thing I want you to get out of Germany is that there were many religious wars. The Peace of Augsburg initially ended the wars in 1555. The Habsburgs reinstituted and said, no, we want our possessions to be Catholic. And then the 30 Years' War reignited those things and finally ended in 1648 to the total destruction of Germany itself. Okay, in England, there was also religious conflict, but in a little different manner and not as violent. As we know, we've talked about Henry VIII. So Henry VIII comes out and he creates the Church of England. Well, that's all well and good, and his children really play out the conflict. His son, Edward VI, was sickly and didn't live very long. Okay, and so he kept the Protestant church under that his father created, but he didn't live long enough to make it really effective. Coming into play next was his daughter, his first daughter, Bloody Mary is what we're calling Mary the First. Mary the First was a Catholic and a devout Catholic. She said, no, 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 no. You guys are all going to be Catholic, okay? And so we're going to go back to Catholicism. And they even had this little thing worked out with Spain where the Spanish were going to try to come help her and take care of her. Well, Mary was basically overthrown and lost her throne to Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I ends up becoming the most powerful and influential, one of the most influential rulers in English history. And like I said today in class, or yesterday in class, she is the reason that we speak English and not Spanish. Okay? Her rule leads to that. So you need to know, I want you to highlight, underline, big letters. Elizabeth I makes sure that Protestantism remained in England. And the reason for that is it gave her more power and autonomy. Now, the version of Protestantism that really took root in England was obviously Anglican, but it also had a strain of, and a thread coming from John Calvin, which was that Protestant work ethic. And so what happened in England is they really began to work hard, and the country allowed merchant wealth to grow. And so capitalism, or the idea that it's okay to make money and to gain capital, that's what capital means, is wealth and money, really began to take off. And so capitalism really takes root in England, and they help spread that idea to the Americans when they eventually come here. We'll get more into that later. But capitalism begins to grow and take solid root in England. Well, the last major country we're going to talk about is France. So what happens in France is also, again, religious conflict. The main thing you need to understand about this is that there was one particular group that was really heavily persecuted. Okay, the government of France is Catholic. Not always has been, but historically they are a Catholic nation. And so officially, the king had to be Catholic. And so the group that caught the most flack and their most dominant or largest Protestant group were a group called the Huguenots. The Huguenots were the French followers of John Calvin. Write that down, you need to know that. The Huguenots were the French followers of John Calvin. So they were the hardworking group, believed in predestination, believed that the Bible was your source, believed that faith is what got you there, and that you were predestined to go to heaven or not, and your life would show that. Well, the Huguenots were persecuted pretty heavily, but the Huguenots had a friend in a guy named Henry of Navarre, okay, or Henry, who would become Henry IV. And so Henry of Navarre was a Huguenot. Well, some people died, you don't need to know who, but Henry was asked to become king of France. He said, and they told him, look, if you're going to become king of France, you have to become a Catholic. And he said, so you're telling me that if I become king of France, I just have to become Catholic, and that's all I have to do. So he said, sure, let's do it. And he issued what's called the Edict of Nantes. And under the Edict of Nantes, Henry said, we're going to stop religious persecution of the Huguenots. They don't, in order to be in France, to be a French citizen, you do not have to be a Catholic, which is what the rule was before. He said, no, we're going to have some religious tolerance. We're going to allow other Protestant faiths to exist. And so we're going to stop persecuting the Protestants and the Huguenots. And Henry IV did that with the Edict of Nantes because he used to be a Huguenot and he converted to Catholicism. Well, several years later, there was a ruler, there were some younger kings, okay? Louis XIII came to power. He was Henry IV's son or grandson, I don't recall. And he was too young to rule. And so this guy that came into power was a guy named Cardinal Richelieu. If you've ever seen any of the Three Musketeers movies, this is the bad guy in the Three Musketeers movies. Well, Cardinal Richelieu became the lead advisor for this king before he was old enough to govern himself. And Cardinal Richelieu was obviously a cardinal. He was Catholic. And so you would think that he would support the Catholic Church no matter what. Well, that simply wasn't the case. What Cardinal Richelieu did was Cardinal Richelieu took the 30 Years' War and said, you know what, if the Habsburgs, who are Catholic, lose power, that means France is going to gain power and influence. So I'm going to take the 30 Years' War and turn it from a religious conflict and turn it into a political conflict, because even though I'm Catholic, this guy is Catholic, I'm going to support the Protestants in Germany and the Holy Roman Empire in attacking the Catholic Habsburgs. And so Richelieu really changes things and turns things around and turns the 30 Years' War into a religious conflict into a political conflict. And that's part of what makes the 30 Years' War destroy Germany, is because you've got all these other countries basically fighting in Germany. France is fighting in Germany and supporting the Protestants in Germany against the Catholics, who have obviously the support of the Pope. And so that destroys Germany. But Richelieu is really important because he helps kind of further the 30 Years' War and turn it into that political conflict, even though, and support Protestants, even though that he is Catholic. All right, so what are some of the long-term effects? Those are the immediate historical effects that, span the 100 years time period or so, the 1500s, 1600s. But let's talk about some of the long-term effects. of the Protestant Reformation. For one, step one is the growth of secularism. Again, secular means not of the church. Ism is idea. Growth of secularism, belief in worldly things. That's number one. People were no longer focused entirely on what the church wanted you to do, and so you were not just allowed, but kind of encouraged to do things as an individual. Step number two was the growth of individualism and the value of the human individual, and no longer the focus on a community. Okay, so your desire to gain wealth, your desire to do great things, grew dramatically during this time. Religious tolerance, obviously, it had to grow, even though there were many wars that were fought and still are over religion. It was the beginnings of a more accepting society and acknowledgement that there's more than one way to honor God and to worship religion. Now, we're still really only talking about Christians in Europe. Jews were not tolerated, okay? The Muslims, or Moors as they were called in Spain, were not tolerated. But it is the beginnings of religious tolerance and different religious ideals. And that's a slow change, but it eventually takes place. And lastly but not leastly is certainly the growth of education. Education grows because almost all of them believe that you got to read the Bible in order to understand what's going on, in order to be a good Christian. And so that led to the growth of education. The Jesuits started schools, spread schools, okay? And so they spread education themselves. But the idea that people had to be able to read in order to get to heaven, in order to understand the Bible and get to heaven, really played a significant part in growing education and people's desire to be educated and to become literate. All right? If you guys have any questions, send me an email and I'll be happy to answer them. But first, we've got a little quick quiz with the questions. So let's take a look. Question number 7 on your bubble sheet. So take out your bubble sheet. Who called the Council of Trent? Is it A, Paul III, B, John II, C, Peter I, or Mark? Question number 8. Who was the major Catholic reformer? Was it Loyola, James II, Henry VIII, or Elizabeth I? Number 9. Who solidified England as a Protestant nation? Elizabeth I, Bloody Mary, Charles V, or Edward VI? That's who solidified England as a Protestant nation. A, Elizabeth, B, Mary, C, Charles V, or D, Edward. Number 10. Where was the Reformation the most violent? Was it Italy, Germany, France, or Britain? A, Italy, B, Germany, C, France, or D, Britain. Number 11. What did the Edict of Nantes do? 1. Or A, freed the Jews. B, made only Catholicism legal in France. C, granted tolerance to the Huguenots in France. Or D, executed the Pope. What did the Edict of Nantes do? A, freed the Jews. B, made only Catholicism legal in France. C, granted tolerance to the Huguenots in France. Or D, executed the Pope. And lastly but not leastly is 12. Who turned the 30 Years' War into a political conflict? Was it Paul III, A, Paul III, B, Cardinal Richelieu, C, Henry VIII, or D, Charles IV? All right, hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you all on Monday, and we will review for this test. Bye-bye.